The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a metal canyon filled with creatures from across the stars. Strange beings floated in tanks of liquid methane while others stood on legs that looked like tree branches. The air buzzed, with 100 different languages and the soft hum of translation devices working overtime to make sense of it all. Ambassador Kyle Martinez sat in the human section and watched the show with quiet eyes. The humans had been given a small area near the back of the chamber, tucked between the waste disposal engineers from Tau Ceti and the mineral traders from the Outer Rim. It was not exactly a place of honor, but Kyle had learned to pick his battles carefully. Today was Fleet Display Day, an annual event where each species showed off their military might to the rest of the galaxy. It was supposed to promote peace through strength, though Kyle suspected it was really just an excuse for the major powers to flex their muscles and remind everyone who was really in charge. The Zephyrian Empire went first, as they always did. Admiral Vexthara stood at the center of the chamber, her crystal body catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. She was beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, all angles and edges that could cut you if you got too close. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Zephyrians possessed, "behold the might of our cosmic destroyer-class vessels." The holographic display that appeared above her head was impressive, Kyle had to admit. The Zephyrian ships were massive things, each one stretching 12 kilometers from bow to stern. They looked like floating cities made of metal and crystal, bristling with weapons that could crack moons in half. The display showed 300 of them arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the blue-white glow of their energy shields. "Each vessel houses 50,000 of our finest warriors," Admiral Vexthara continued, "and carries weapons capable of sterilizing entire worlds. Our fleet ensures that peace reigns throughout civilized space." The chamber erupted in polite applause, though Kyle noticed that some of the smaller species looked more worried than impressed. Having 300 world-cracking ships pointed at you was probably not very comforting. Even if they were supposedly there to protect you, the hegemony of Korthak went next, and their display was even more disturbing. Their bioships looked like they had been grown rather than built, all smooth curves and organic lines that pulsed with their own internal light. The creatures inside them were not separate from their vessels, but part of them, linked by neural connections that made ship and crew into a single living weapon. "Our vessels heal themselves," announced the Korthak representative, a thing that looked like a cross between a tree and a squid. "They learn from each battle and grow stronger. What does not kill them makes them more deadly." The bioships in the hologram demonstrated this by taking simulated damage and then regenerating, their hulls flowing like liquid metal to seal the wounds. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like watching a flower bloom while knowing it would eat you if you got too close. The synthetic coalition followed with their eye-controlled fleets, ships that moved with mechanical precision and thought at the speed of light. Their vessels were sleek and angular, designed by computer minds that had optimized every line for maximum efficiency. They showed formations that shifted and flowed like schools of fish, each ship knowing exactly where every other ship would be at any given moment. "Our fleets think as one," the coalition speaker announced in a voice that sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. "They do not hesitate, they do not fear, they do not make mistakes. They are perfection made manifest." Other species followed with their own displays. The Traders Guild showed off their massive cargo haulers converted into mobile fortresses. The hive minds demonstrated swarm tactics with thousands of small ships moving like angry insects. The Gas Giant Collective revealed vessels that could dive into the hearts of stars and emerge unharmed. Each display was more impressive than the last, and Kyle found himself wondering how humanity had ever managed to survive first contact with any of these civilizations. The answer, he knew, was that they had been very careful and very lucky, and had made sure never to appear threatening enough to warrant a second look when it came time for Earth's presentation. Kyle stood up slowly and walked to the center of the chamber. He could feel the weight of 1,000 alien eyes on him, and he knew that most of them were expecting to be entertained rather than impressed. He activated the holographic display with a simple gesture, and 30 small ships appeared in the space above his head. They were sleek and functional, with clean lines and no unnecessary decoration. Each one was about 800 meters long, roughly the size of a large ocean vessel back on Earth, compared to the massive dreadnoughts and bioships that had come before. They looked like toys. The silence in the chamber lasted for about 3 seconds before the first chuckle escaped from somewhere in the Traders Guild section. It spread like a virus, infecting first the smaller species and then the larger ones. Soon the entire chamber was filled with the sound of alien laughter in a dozen different forms. "These are fishing boats, yes?" asked Ambassador Quelm of the Tridarian Collective, his 3 heads bobbing with amusement. "Very nice fishing boats, but surely not warships?" The methane breathers from Proxima Station were making sounds that their translation devices rendered as wheezing laughter. 30 ships? Our mining operations have larger escort fleets? Are you certain you did not accidentally display your civilian vessels instead? Kyle maintained his composure, though Commander Lisa Park sitting behind him could see the slight tightening around his eyes. "The Earth Defense Fleet represents our commitment to peaceful cooperation while maintaining adequate defensive capabilities," he said in a voice that carried no emotion at all. This only made the laughter louder. Several delegates began what humans would recognize as placing bets, though they were wagering on how quickly the toy fleet would be destroyed if it ever encountered real combat. The numbers being thrown around ranged from 30 seconds to a generous 2 minutes. "Perhaps," suggested the Zephyrian Admiral with what might have been kindness in her voice, "humanity would be better served focusing on cultural and scientific contributions rather than military ones. We would be happy to provide escort services for your trade vessels." The Korthic representative made a noise that sounded like wind through dead leaves. "Your ships are very pretty," it said. "They would make excellent targets for training exercises." Even the usually serious synthetic coalition seemed amused, their speaker's voice taking on what Kyle had learned to recognize as their version of humor. "We calculate a 0.001% probability of these vessels surviving contact with any significant military force. Perhaps Earth should consider investing in better shielding technology." Commander Lisa Park leaned forward slightly, her hand moving toward the datapad that contained the real specifications of the Earth Defense Fleet. Kyle caught her eye and shook his head almost imperceptibly. She settled back in her chair with visible effort. "We appreciate the concern of our fellow council members," Kyle said, his voice still perfectly calm. "However, I believe you will find that appearances can be deceiving. The Earth Defense Fleet is more than adequate for our defensive needs." This brought another wave of laughter, though some of the smaller species were beginning to look uncomfortable. They knew what it was like to be mocked by the major powers, and they felt a kind of sympathy for the humans, who were trying so hard to be taken seriously. The session continued for another hour, with various species discussing trade agreements and territorial disputes. But the main topic of conversation remained humanity's pathetic little fleet. Jokes flew back and forth across the chamber like particles in a collider, each one designed to be funnier than the last. Kyle endured it all with the patience of a statue. He had expected this reaction, had even planned for it. The other human delegates followed his lead, maintaining their dignity while the galaxy laughed at their expense. They knew something that the rest of the council did not, something that would have stopped the laughter cold if it had been spoken aloud. The 30 ships of the Earth Defense Fleet were not the entirety of humanity's military power. They were not even a significant fraction of it. They were something much more dangerous than that. They were a test. As the session finally ended, and the various delegates began to file out of the chamber, Kyle gathered his things with the same calm precision he had shown throughout the day. Commander Park fell into step beside him, along with the rest of the human delegation. "That went well," she said quietly, her voice carrying just a hint of sarcasm. "Better than expected," Kyle replied. "They took the bait completely." Not one of them asked about specifications, crew complement, or operational capabilities. They saw the size and assumed they knew everything they needed to know. And when they find out the truth? Kyle smiled for the first time that day, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then they will learn why humanity survived long enough to reach the stars. We do not build fair fights, Lisa. We build traps. The human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council chamber in silence, leaving behind a room. 3 months had passed since the fleet display day, and the jokes about humanity's tiny fleet had become a regular source of entertainment throughout the galaxy. Comedians on a dozen worlds included bits about the Earth Navy in their routines, while military academies used the human ships as examples of what not to do when designing a Space Force. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the EDF Defiant and watched the long-range sensors with growing concern. The readings were unmistakable, even though he wished they were wrong. Something massive was moving through the dark spaces between stars, heading directly toward the populated core worlds of the galaxy. "How many ships are we looking at?" he asked his sensor officer, Lieutenant Amy Cooper. Amy's face was pale as she checked her readings for the third time. "Initial count shows at least 4,000 vessels, Captain. But they're still emerging from dark space. The number keeps growing." Jake felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He had hoped they would have more time before this day came, but apparently the universe had other plans. "Send an encrypted message to Earth Command. Tell them the Void Scourge are awake and moving. Authorization code Black Winter." The Void Scourge were the nightmare that kept galactic leaders awake at night. They were a species of biomechanical constructs that had terrorized the galaxy centuries ago before disappearing into the dark spaces beyond the rim. Their ships were living things that could adapt to any weapon, learn from any tactic, and regenerate from almost any damage. They had been dormant for so long that most species had begun to think of them as ancient history. Apparently, ancient history was about to repeat itself. Emergency sessions convened across the galaxy as the news spread. The Galactic Council went into crisis mode, with representatives from every major species converging on the capital world of Nexus Prime. The mood was grim as the scope of the threat became clear. Admiral Vextara stood before the assembled delegates, her crystal form flickering with stress patterns that made her look like a broken prism. Long-range scouts confirmed the worst possible scenario. The Void Scourge fleet numbers in the thousands, and they are heading directly for the Kepler 442 system. If they reach the inhabited worlds there, billions will die. The Kepler 442 system was home to 3 species and over 20 billion sentient beings. It was also a major trade hub and military staging area. If it fell, the entire inner galaxy would be vulnerable to Scourge attack. "We have no choice," declared the Korthic representative, its tree-like form swaying with agitation. "Every available ship must be mobilized. This is a threat to all life in the galaxy." The Synthetic Coalition speaker agreed with mechanical precision. "All fleets will converge on Kepler 442. We will make our stand there." Species after species pledged their forces to the defense. The Zephyrian Empire committed their entire cosmic destroyer fleet. The hegemony of Korthak promised their bioships and regenerative technology. The Traders Guild offered their converted cargo haulers and their knowledge of space lanes. Even the minor species pledged whatever ships they could spare when it came time for Earth's contribution. Ambassador Kyle Martinez stood and spoke in the same calm voice he had used during the fleet display day. "The Earth Defense Fleet requests permission to participate in the defense of Kepler 442. The chamber fell silent for a moment before Admiral Vexthara responded with what might have been kindness. "Ambassador Martinez, I appreciate Earth's willingness to help in this crisis. However, this is a matter for serious military forces. Perhaps your ships could assist with evacuation efforts instead?" Several delegates nodded in agreement. The Proxima Station representative made a sound that translated as sympathetic laughter. "Yes, leave the fighting to those equipped for it. Your little ships would be destroyed in the first wave." Kyle's expression did not change, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. I understand your concern, Admiral. However, Earth ships are specifically designed for this type of threat. We have been preparing for the return of the Void Scourge for quite some time. This brought more laughter, though it was nervous laughter now. The idea that humanity had been preparing for anything more dangerous than pirates was amusing in a disturbing way. Very well, Admiral Vexthara said finally. Your ships may take a support position in the outer system. Try not to interfere with actual military operations. The meeting continued for several more hours as battle plans were drawn. Up and command structures established. The combined fleets of the galaxy would mass in the asteroid belt of the Kepler 442 system, using the rocky debris as cover and creating overlapping fields of fire. It was a solid defensive strategy that had worked against conventional enemies. Many times before, 2 weeks later, the greatest military force in galactic history assembled in the Kepler 442 system. Thousands of ships from dozens of species created a wall of metal and energy that stretched across millions of kilometers. The Zephyrian dreadnoughts formed the backbone of the fleet, their crystal hulls gleaming with power. The Korthak bioships pulsed with organic light as they prepared their living weapons. The Synthetic Coalition's vessels moved in perfect formation, their AI minds calculating firing solutions and tactical probabilities. Captain Jake Morrison watched the massive fleet deployment from the bridge of the Defiant, positioned far out. In the outer system, where the human ships had been assigned to stay out of the way, the 30 vessels of the Earth Defense Fleet looked tiny compared to the alien armada, small dots of light against the vast darkness of space. All human vessels, this is Morrison, he spoke into his communicator. Remember, we are here to observe and learn. Maintain passive sensors only. Do not engage unless specifically ordered. Captain Ryan Torres of the EDF Vengeance acknowledged the order, as did the commanders of the other 28 ships. To any observer monitoring their communications, they sounded like inexperienced officers trying to stay out of the way of their betters. The alien fleet commanders barely noticed the human ships. Admiral Vexthara was focused on coordinating the defense, while her counterparts from other species prepared their own forces. The humans were so far out on the edge of the formation that most of the tactical displays did not even show them. Contacts emerging from hyperspace, reported the sensor officer aboard the Stellar Dominator. Multiple contacts bearing 27 Mark IV. It's them. The Void Scourge fleet materialized out of dark space like a plague of mechanical locusts. Their ships were twisted things that seemed to violate the basic rules of physics, hulls that bent light around them and weapon systems that crackled with dark energy. They moved with the fluid grace of living creatures despite being constructs of metal and organic tissue. All units, weapons free, Admiral Vexthara commanded. Engage at maximum range. The battle began with the thunder of energy weapons and the brilliant flash of explosions. The alien fleets fought with courage and determination, their massive ships trading devastating blows with the Scourge vessels. Plasma cannons fired streams of superheated gas while particle beams carved through enemy hulls. The bioships of the Korthak unleashed living weapons that sought out their targets, like predators hunting prey, but the Void Scourge were adapting. Their ships began to change even as the battle raged, their hulls reconfiguring to better resist the incoming fire. Weapons that had been effective in the first minutes of combat became useless as the enemy learned to counter them. They're evolving faster than we expected, Admiral Vexthara reported grimly. All ships switched to secondary weapon systems. The battle raged for hours with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The galactic forces had superior numbers and firepower, but the Scourge had adaptive technology that allowed them to counter every new tactic. Ships began to fall on both sides, their hulls cracked open and spilling atmosphere into the void. Far out on the edge of the battle, the human ships maintained their position and watched. To the alien commanders, they appeared to be staying safely out of harm's way, exactly where untested crews belonged. The humans maintained radio silence except for occasional status reports. and their ships showed no signs of moving to engage. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched the tactical display with careful eyes. His crew worked quietly around him, monitoring every aspect of the battle and feeding data to the other human ships through encrypted channels. They were learning, cataloging every weapon the Scourge used and every adaptation they made. "How long do we wait?" asked Commander Alex Turner, his tactical officer. "Until we know everything we need to know," Morrison replied. "The aliens are fighting the Scourge like they would fight any other enemy. We need to understand what makes them different." The battle continued to rage, and slowly the tide began to turn against the galactic forces. The Void Scourge ships were adapting faster than anyone had expected, their technology evolving in real time to counter every weapon fired at them. The beautiful cosmic destroyers of the Zephyrian Empire began to fall, their crystal hulls cracking under the assault of dark energy weapons. "All ships, fall back to secondary positions," Admiral Vexthara commanded, her voice tight with strain. "We need to regroup and reassess." It was then that Captain Morrison opened a channel to the flagship. The bridge of the Stellar Dominator fell into stunned silence as the sensor readings began to make no sense at all. What had been 30 small human ships moments before were now showing mass signatures that defied every law of physics the Zephyrians understood. "Sensor malfunction," reported the science officer, her crystal form flickering with confusion. "The human vessels are displaying impossible readings. They appear to be growing in size." Admiral Vexthara stared at the tactical display where the 30 dots representing human ships were expanding rapidly. "Run a full diagnostic on all sensor arrays?" "This cannot be correct." But the sensors were working perfectly. What they were seeing was the impossible becoming reality as the Earth Defense Fleet revealed its true nature for the first time in galactic history. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched his ship transform around him. The walls expanded outward as compressed space unfolded, revealing corridors and chambers that had been folded into dimensions smaller than atoms. Weapon systems that had existed in pocket universes materialized along the hull, their targeting computers coming online with soft electronic whispers. "Dimensional compression at full deployment," reported Commander Alex Turner from his tactical station. "All weapon systems are active and ready. Shield generators are operating at full capacity." Morrison nodded and opened a channel to the rest of the human fleet. "All ships, this is Morrison. Combat configuration is complete. Begin pattern alpha. Engagement sequence." The response came from 29 other captains simultaneously, their voices creating a chorus of deadly intent. "Pattern alpha confirmed. All ships ready for engagement." What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations to come, though no species would ever fully understand how the humans had managed to compress 15-kilometer warships into 800-meter packages. The technology involved folding space-time itself, creating vessels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. While appearing small from any single perspective, the Defiant had become a massive battleship bristling with weapons that operated on principles the galaxy had never seen. Its main guns were not energy weapons or plasma cannons, but kinetic accelerators that could fire projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles themselves were guided by artificial intelligence systems that could predict enemy movements with inhuman accuracy. Captain Lisa Park, now revealed as the commander of the equally massive EDF Retribution, smiled grimly as her ship's weapons came online. "All ships, target the Scourge formation Charlie 7. Let's show them what happens when you mess with Earth." The first volley from the human fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Instead of the bright beams of energy that other species favored, the human weapons fired solid projectiles that were invisible until they struck their targets. The Void Scourge ships, which had been adapting to energy weapons for hours, suddenly found themselves facing an entirely different type of threat. The kinetic rounds struck the Scourge vessels at velocities that turned matter into pure energy. On impact, ships that had successfully adapted to plasma cannons and particle beams simply exploded into brilliant flashes of light as solid matter, traveling at relativistic speeds tore through their hulls. The adaptive technology that had made them so dangerous against conventional weapons was useless against the fundamental physics of mass and velocity. Direct hits on 17 enemy vessels, reported Lieutenant Amy Cooper from the Defiance sensor station. All targets destroyed. The Scourge fleet is beginning to respond. The response was immediate and terrifying. The remaining Scourge ships began to change, their hulls reconfiguring to better resist kinetic impacts. Armor plating grew thicker while internal structures shifted to absorb and distribute impact energy. But the humans had anticipated this. "Switch to Solomon Protocol," Morrison commanded. "Show them what we learned from studying their adaptation patterns." The human fleet's formation shifted as the 30 massive vessels began to move in ways that defied conventional understanding of space combat. They seemed to teleport from one position to another, their dimensional compression technology, allowing them to fold space around themselves and appear anywhere within a massive sphere of influence. Captain Ryan Torres, commanding the EDF Vengeance, watched as his ship materialized directly behind a group of Scourge vessels that had been adapting to frontal kinetic attacks. "Surprise!" he muttered as his weapons fired into the unprotected rear sections of the enemy ships. The Scourge fleet began to panic, if such a thing was possible for biomechanical constructs. Their ships started firing in all directions, trying to hit human vessels that were never where they appeared to be. The adaptive technology that had served them so well was useless against an enemy that could attack from any angle at any time, but the humans were not finished. The next phase of their assault was even more devastating than the kinetic bombardment. "Deploy viral warfare protocols," Morrison ordered. "Let's teach them about human computer science." The human ships began launching clouds of microscopic machines. Nanobots so small they were invisible to most sensors. These were not designed to destroy enemy ships through physical damage, but to infiltrate their systems and turn them against each other. The Void Scourge vessels, so proud of their adaptive technology, suddenly found their own systems being rewritten by computer viruses that evolved faster than their defenses could adapt. Commander Alex Turner watched his tactical display with professional satisfaction as 3 Scourge vessels turned their weapons on their own fleet. "The nanobots are working faster than expected. Enemy ships are beginning to attack each other." The virus was not simply a weapon, but a sophisticated artificial intelligence program that could learn and adapt just as quickly as the Scourge technology. It spread through the enemy fleet like a plague, turning their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Ships that had been perfectly coordinated moments before began firing on their allies, their targeting systems corrupted by human programming. Captain Morrison opened a channel to the alien fleet commanders, his voice carrying across the battlefield. With calm authority, "All Allied ships maintain current positions. Do not engage Scourge vessels that are attacking each other. Let them do our work for us." Admiral Vextara, still struggling to understand what was happening, managed to respond. "Captain Morrison, how are you doing this? What technology are you using?" "We're not using technology, Admiral," Morrison replied. "We're using intelligence. The Scourge adapt to weapons and tactics, but they don't understand the concept of psychological warfare. We're not just fighting their ships, we're fighting their minds." The battle began to turn decisively in favor of the galactic forces, but not because of the massive alien fleets that had been struggling for hours. The 30 human vessels were systematically dismantling the Scourge formation using tactics that no one had ever seen before. They fought like a single organism, each ship knowing exactly where every other ship would be at any given moment. The quantum entanglement communicators that linked the human fleet allowed them to share tactical data instantaneously across any distance. When one ship learned something about enemy behavior, all 30 ships knew it immediately. When one captain developed a new tactic, the entire fleet could implement it in perfect coordination. Captain Lisa Park's retribution had become the center of a web of destruction, coordinating attacks from ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her weapons were not just firing at enemy vessels, but at where enemy vessels would be based on predictive algorithms that accounted for every variable in the battle space. Enemy flagship identified, reported her tactical officer. Designation: Void Mother, distance 2 million kilometers and closing. The Void Mother was a monster beyond comprehension, a biomechanical construct the size of a small moon. Its surface crawled with weapons that could crack planets, and its core contained the collective intelligence of the entire Scourge fleet. It was the source of their adaptive technology, the brain that allowed them to evolve countermeasures to any weapon. Morrison studied the tactical display and made a decision that would have seemed insane to any conventional military mind. All ships converge on the Void Mother. It's time to end this. The 30 human vessels moved as one, their formation tightening into a spear point aimed at the heart of the enemy fleet. The Void Mother's weapons opened fire, launching dark energy beams that could unmake matter itself. But the human ships simply folded space around themselves, the deadly beams passing through empty dimensions while the vessels remained unharmed. The aliens watching from their damaged ships could only stare in amazement. The humans were not just winning, they were making it look effortless. Ships that had been mocked as toys were now revealed as the most advanced weapons of war the galaxy had ever seen. How? Whispered Admiral Vexthara, her crystal form flickering, with patterns that indicated complete bewilderment. How is this possible? The answer came from Captain Morrison, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of human military evolution. We don't build fair fights, Admiral. We build solutions to problems that haven't been invented yet. What followed was not a battle in any sense that the galaxy understood. It was a demonstration of what happened when humanity applied thousands of years of military evolution to a problem that everyone else had been trying to solve with bigger guns and thicker armor. The Void Mother loomed before the human fleet like a mechanical planet, its surface covered with weapons that could destroy entire worlds. Dark energy crackled along its hull as it prepared to unleash the full power of Scourge technology against the 30 vessels that dared to challenge it. The biomechanical construct had been the terror of the galaxy for good reason, and it was about to remind everyone why. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched the monster approach with the calm expression of someone who had been expecting this moment for a very long time. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise and practiced. They had trained for this scenario in 1,000 different simulations, and now it was time to put theory into practice. All ships implement Solomon Protocol. Morrison spoke into his communicator. Let's show them what happens when humans stop playing by the rules. The response came from 29 other captains simultaneously, their voices creating a harmony of deadly intent. Solomon Protocol confirmed, all ships ready for final phase. The human fleet's formation shifted again, but this time something different happened. The 30 massive vessels began to move in ways that violated every law of physics the watching aliens thought they understood. They seemed to exist in multiple places at once, their images flickering and dancing across the tactical displays like ghosts made of metal and energy. Commander Alex Turner, monitoring the tactical situation from his station aboard the Defiant, allowed himself a small smile. Quantum phase shifting is operating at maximum efficiency. Enemy targeting systems are unable to lock onto our true positions. The Void Mother's weapons opened fire, sending beams of dark energy that could dissolve matter at the molecular level. But the beams passed through empty space, striking phantom images while the real human ships attacked from angles that should have been impossible. The Scourge intelligence, for all its adaptive capabilities, had never encountered an enemy that could exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Captain Lisa Park, commanding the EDF Retribution, watched her weapon systems engage targets that existed in different dimensions from her ship. "This is almost too easy," she muttered. "Are we sure this is the same enemy that terrorized the galaxy for centuries?" "Same enemy," Morrison replied through the quantum communicator. "Different opponent? They've been fighting species that try to match their strengths. We're not trying to beat them at their own game, we're changing the rules of the game itself. The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen. Where other species built bigger weapons, humans built smarter weapons. Where others relied on overwhelming force, humans relied on overwhelming intelligence. Every human vessel was connected to every other through quantum entanglement, allowing them to share information and coordinate actions faster than light itself. The Void Mother began to change, its biomechanical systems adapting to the quantum attacks. New weapons sprouted from its surface, designed to target enemies that existed in multiple dimensions. But the humans had anticipated this response, and they were ready with their next surprise. "Deploy the neural cascade," Morrison ordered. Time to have a conversation with our friend. What happened next would have been impossible for any other species to imagine. The human ships began transmitting not weapons but information. Streams of data flowed toward the Void Mother, carrying with them something that no enemy had ever tried to give the Scourge before. Understanding, the data streams contained the entire history of human conflict, from the first wars fought with sticks and stones to the most recent battles among the stars. But more than that, they contained the philosophy behind human warfare, the reasons why humans fought, and the principles that guided their actions. It was an assault on the Scourge intelligence itself, an attempt to reprogram not just their systems, but their very understanding of what conflict meant. Lieutenant Amy Cooper, monitoring the data transmission from her station, reported with wonder in her voice. "The Void Mother is responding to our signals. It's not trying to adapt to them, it's trying to understand them." The massive construct had stopped firing, its weapons powering down as its collective intelligence processed the information being transmitted by the human fleet. For the first time in its existence, the Scourge was encountering an enemy that was trying to communicate rather than destroy. Captain Ryan Torres, watching from the bridge of the EDF Vengeance, shook his head in amazement. "I still can't believe this is working. We're having a philosophical debate with a moon-sized weapon. It's working because we're offering something they've never been offered before," Morrison explained. "Every species they've ever fought has treated them like monsters to be destroyed. We're treating them like people to be understood." The conversation taking place between the human fleet and the Void Mother was happening at the speed of light, with data streams carrying questions and answers back and forth in microseconds. The Scourge intelligence was discovering that the humans were not trying to defeat them through superior firepower, but through superior empathy, the watching alien. Fleets could only observe in stunned silence as the battle transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were not just fighting the Scourge, they were teaching them. They were showing them that conflict did not have to end in the complete destruction of one side or the other. Admiral Vexthara, her crystal form flickering with patterns that indicated complete bewilderment, managed to find her voice. "What are they doing? Why have they stopped fighting?" The answer came from Captain Morrison, his voice carrying across the battlefield with the authority of someone who had just changed the course of galactic history. "We haven't stopped fighting, Admiral. We've just changed what we're fighting for. Instead of trying to destroy the Scourge, we're trying to save them." The concept was so alien to the watching species that many of them could not process it. The idea that an enemy could be converted rather than conquered was beyond their understanding. But the humans had studied the Scourge for centuries, and they had reached a conclusion that no other species had ever considered. The Void Scourge were not evil. They were afraid. They had been driven to the edges of the galaxy by species that saw them as monsters, forced to live in the cold darkness between stars. Their attacks on civilized worlds were not acts of malice, but desperate attempts to find a place where they could exist without being hunted and destroyed. The adaptive technology that made them so dangerous was originally designed for survival, not conquest. "They're refugees," Morrison explained to the alien commanders. "They've been running from extinction for so long that they've forgotten how to do anything else. All they know is adaptation and survival because that's all they've ever been allowed to know." The data streams between the human fleet and the Void Mother continued, carrying with them an offer that no species had ever made to the Scourge. The humans were proposing not just a ceasefire, but a solution to the fundamental problem that had driven the Scourge to violence in the first place. "We're offering them a home," Morrison continued. "A place where they can exist without fear, where their adaptive technology can be used for creation instead of destruction. We're offering them what every species wants, the right to survive and grow." The Void Mother's response came not in words but in actions. The massive construct began to power down its weapons, its biomechanical systems shifting from combat mode to something that the watching aliens had never seen before. It was displaying trust, the first time in centuries that the Scourge had lowered their defenses in the presence of another species. Captain Lisa Park, monitoring the situation from her command center, felt a chill run down her spine. "Jake, they're accepting the offer. The entire Scourge fleet is standing down." Around the Void Mother, thousands of smaller Scourge vessels began to power down their weapons as well. The collective intelligence that controlled them had made a decision that would reshape the galaxy forever. After centuries of conflict, the Scourge were laying down their arms. The alien fleets watched in amazement, as the most feared enemy in galactic history simply stopped fighting. Ships that had been locked in deadly combat moments before now drifted peacefully through space, their weapons silent and their crews waiting to see what would happen next. Morrison opened a channel to all ships, both human and alien, all vessels. "Stand down from combat status. The war is over. We have reached an understanding with the Scourge leadership. They will be withdrawing to the Outer Rim, where they will be establishing a new home with our assistance." The silence that followed was deafening. Across the galaxy, military commanders and political leaders struggled to process what had just happened. The humans had not just defeated the Scourge, they had converted them. They had turned the greatest threat in galactic history into potential allies, and they had done it all with 30 ships that everyone had laughed at just months before. The silence that followed the end of the battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. Across thousands of ships from dozens of species, crews stood at their stations and tried to process what they had just witnessed. The most feared enemy in galactic history had simply stopped fighting, not because they had been defeated, but because they had been understood. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched as the Void Mother began its slow retreat toward the outer rim of the galaxy. The massive construct moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large, its biomechanical systems pulsing with a soft light that indicated peaceful intent. Around it, the smaller Scourge vessels followed in perfect formation, their weapons powered down and their hulls displaying patterns that the human translation computers recognized as gratitude. "All human vessels begin dimensional compression." "Sequence," Morrison commanded. "Return to standard configuration." The 30 massive warships of the Earth Defense Fleet began to fold back into their original forms, their hulls contracting as weapon systems and shield generators retreated into pocket dimensions. Within minutes, the fleet that had just reshaped galactic history appeared once again to be nothing more than 30 small ships, each barely 800 meters long. To the watching aliens, it was as if the most powerful military force they had ever seen had simply vanished, leaving behind the same toy fleet they had mocked just months before. But now the laughter had died in their throats, replaced by a mixture of awe and terror as they began to understand what humanity had been hiding. Admiral Vextara, her crystal form flickering with patterns that indicated deep confusion, managed to find her voice. "Captain Morrison, how did you accomplish this? How did you end a war that has lasted for centuries?" Morrison's response was simple and direct. "We listened, Admiral. Something no one else had ever bothered to do. The Scourge were not our enemies, they were our problem to solve. And humans are very good at solving problems." The implications of what had just happened began to ripple through the galaxy like shock waves from an exploding star. Emergency sessions convened on every major world as governments tried to understand how their assumptions about human capabilities had been so completely wrong. The species that had been dismissed as harmless primitives had just demonstrated military technology that was centuries ahead of anything the galaxy possessed. But perhaps more disturbing was the realization that the humans had been hiding their true capabilities from the very beginning. The tiny fleet had been a deliberate deception, a carefully crafted illusion designed to make humanity appear weak and unthreatening. Every laugh, every joke, every dismissive comment had been part of a plan that stretched back generations. Within hours of the battle's end, Captain Morrison found himself summoned to an emergency session of the Galactic Council. As he entered the chamber, he noticed that the seating arrangement had changed dramatically. The human delegation now occupied the central position, with other species arranged around them in a clear hierarchy of respect and fear. The chamber itself felt different too. Gone was the casual atmosphere of previous meetings, replaced by a tension so thick it could be cut with a blade. Representatives from every major species sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the small group of humans who had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Ambassador Kyle Martinez took his place at the speaker's podium, his expression as calm and composed as it had been during the fleet display day months before. But now his words carried the weight of demonstrated power behind them. "Fellow members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "I stand before you today not as a representative of a minor species seeking acceptance, but as the voice of humanity's place in the galactic community." Ambassador Quelm of the Tridarian Collective, his three heads bobbing nervously, was the first to speak. "Ambassador Martinez, the Council wishes to reconsider humanity's role in galactic affairs. Clearly, we have underestimated your capabilities." Kyle smiled, and for the first time since the humans had joined the Council, it was not a diplomatic smile. "Have you indeed? And what role would you suggest we play, Ambassador Quelm?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every species in the chamber knew that the old balance of power was gone forever. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that made even the mighty Zephyrian Empire look primitive by comparison. Their ships could exist in multiple dimensions, their weapons could strike at the speed of light, and their intelligence capabilities were beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, but perhaps most importantly, they had shown that they could solve problems that others could only fight. Admo Vexthara, her crystal form now displaying patterns of deep respect, spoke carefully. "Humanity has clearly earned a leadership position in the Council. Your military capabilities and diplomatic skills have proven themselves beyond question." Kyle's response surprised everyone in the chamber. "We appreciate the offer, Admiral, but humanity has no desire to lead the galaxy. We never have. Our goals remain the same as they were when we first joined this council: peaceful cooperation, mutual respect, and the continued development of interstellar civilization." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. The aliens had expected the humans to demand tribute, territory, or political dominance. Instead, they were turning down the very power that their demonstration had earned them. "But your fleet," protested the Synthetic Coalition's representative, "your technology. Surely Earth deserves recognition for its contributions to galactic security?" "Our fleet exists to protect Earth and our allies," Kyle replied calmly. "Nothing more, nothing less. We have no desire to conquer the galaxy, impose our will on other species, or establish an empire. We simply want to be treated as equals rather than curiosities." The word equals carried new meaning now. The humans were not asking to be equal to the other species, they were informing them that they already were. The demonstration at Kepler 442 had not been about showing superiority, but about demanding respect. Captain Morrison, who had been invited to address the council, stood and spoke with the same quiet authority he had used during the battle. "The Earth Defense Fleet will continue to patrol human space and respond to threats against any member of this council who requests our assistance. We hope that today's events will lead to better understanding between all species." He paused, letting his words sink in before adding with the hint of a smile, And perhaps in the future you might consider asking about a fleet's capabilities before making assumptions about its effectiveness. Humans have a saying, don't judge a book by its cover. I believe recent events have demonstrated the wisdom of that philosophy. The council session continued for several more hours, but the real business had been concluded in those first few minutes. The galaxy now understood that humanity was not a minor species to be protected or patronized, but a major power that had chosen to remain hidden until circumstances forced them to reveal themselves. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Kyle Martinez delivered one final message to the assembled representatives. The galaxy is changing, and we must all adapt to that change. The old ways of thinking about conflict and cooperation are no longer sufficient. We must learn to work together, to understand each other, and to solve problems through intelligence rather than force. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had mocked humanity just months before. The Scourge War is over, but the real work is just beginning. We have the opportunity to build something better than what came before, but only if we choose cooperation over competition, understanding over assumption. The human delegation filed out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of aliens who were just beginning to understand that their universe had changed forever. The small, peaceful species from the third planet of an unremarkable star system had just become the most influential force in galactic politics, and they had done it all while maintaining their sense of humor outside the council chambers. Captain Morrison contacted his fleet commanders through their quantum communicators. All ships return to patrol stations. Standard deployment pattern. And remember, we're still just a small fleet protecting Earth's interests. The laughter that echoed through the communication channel suggested that the human officers understood the joke perfectly. After all, they really were just a small fleet. It was the rest of the galaxy that had finally learned what small actually meant when humans were involved. The Earth Defense Fleet dispersed to their assigned patrol routes. 30 unremarkable ships carrying the weight of a secret that would reshape interstellar civilization. They had revealed just enough of their capabilities to earn respect. While keeping enough hidden to maintain their security, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. And that was exactly what the humans had been planning all along. They had not sought to conquer or control, but simply to be acknowledged as equals in a universe that had been ready to dismiss them as irrelevant. Now, as the stars wheeled overhead and the great ships of the galaxy went about their business, everyone knew that the small fleet from Earth was watching.